Welcome to SHOWstudio, Paris Fashion Week, and we're doing our seasonal student panel, which is always my favourite panel because we get amazing and interesting young people from across different sort of fashion disciplines and different fashion schools to come in and talk a little bit about one particular show. We're obviously going to be talking about the Vetements show, but also about kind of their opinions on Fashion Week, but also the state of the industry in general. I love these panels because whenever we do it with students, they always say things completely different to what I think they're going to say, and they like different things to what I think they're going to like, and I always come away feeling really old and really uncool. So yeah, don't make me feel too bad. But before we kind of dive into talking about the Vetements show, which took place last night in Paris, and talking a little bit about the label and what's exciting about it, or what we like about it, or what we don't like about it, I'll let my great set of young people who've got up bright and early just introduce themselves, starting with you, Aude.
Hello everyone. My name is Aude. I'm currently completing my MA at the Courtauld Institute of Art, specializing in the history of dress, and I still believe in print, so I hope to join an editorial team and magazine later on.
Nice.
Hopefully.
Hi, my name is Vilde. I'm currently in my final year at London College of Fashion, doing fashion design and development. So yeah, my mind is pretty much in the mood of that final collection. And then yeah, I just got back from a year in New York where I worked for Fellay. So yeah, we'll see what happens when I finish.
Exciting.
Hi, my name's Sahil. I'm studying fashion communication with promotion at Central St. Martin's, and I'd hope to one day work in art direction or photography.
Hi, I'm Priyesh. I study fashion history and theory at St. Martin's, and I also work at the Live Archives, and I'd like to go into fashion research after I finish studying.
Hi, I'm Aya. I'm completing a master's in fashion journalism at Central St. Martin's, and my last internship was working on an exhibition called The Belgians on Belgian fashion, so I would say that is my area of expertise.
Nice. And tell me, I'm going to kick off with kind of big question, but obvious one. Do we like Vetements? It seems like it's, everyone in the fashion press is completely in love. You're seeing big editors kind of fawning over this exciting young collective. Obviously, there's they present themselves very much like a group, but then you have someone like Lotte Bukova, who opened the show, and she styles it, and she obviously styles Gosia Rubinski as well. So it feels like this very interesting collaborative set of young people. Do we like it? Do you guys like it? Do young people like it? Yeah?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's clothes that you see around, but it's also clothes that you can make yourself, which to me, I'm not a designer, but I know one of my friends bought me the security t-shirt, and she cut it up and stitched it the way that he did, but she changed little things, and it's to a non-design student, it kind of inspires you to see maybe I could do this, because even Lotte, I was watching this really old video of her after she graduated from CSM, and she did fine art, and then she was saying that she would take some of her pictures and she would print them onto t-shirts and make clothes of her own, and that's how she got into design, and slowly she obviously became a stylist. But just as someone who's not in design, I think it's still, I guess, viable, or still interesting. It's not just he's not a designer's designer, I think.
Do you think that's why it's interesting you say that notion of being able to make it yourself? Because I remember speaking to a lot of people when Medium Kirchhoff were kind of doing all their amazing collections, and a similar appeal was that idea that you could make that look for yourself, even if you couldn't. Is that something that you guys like, that sense of a certain degree of accessibility?
They encourage it as well. On their Instagram, I saw a picture of just a pair of jeans with scissors, and they kind of showed how to cut it the way that it looks like Vetements wear. So I think it's part of their whole brand.
Yeah, and it's just garments that everyone wears every day, really, but with a twist, so it's really relatable, and it's so wearable, easy to wear. So it's everyone is just used to those kind of shapes and silhouettes, so it's familiar to everyone, and then it's just easy to.
I think the real appeal, though, is this I don't give a fuck image, whether
Yeah.
we talked about this, whether it's real or not. It's just so exciting to see a brand that just shows ugly models, shows clothes that might not be immediately wearable, and have this whole vibe of not wanting to please.
Yeah.
Because there's been so many changes in fashion recently, and I feel like every designer is just clinging on to what they know, scared of making a mistake, scared of showing the wrong Instagram picture, and they just do their own thing.
I think it's also quite cool that it's come from Paris. I think New York has their young set of designers, and so does London. Paris doesn't really have anything like that. I think it makes it a lot more interesting. As Paris fashion, it can be quite boring sometimes.
I think you're right, but what I find interesting about that is they're not Parisian. It's the
Yeah.
fact that it's that Russia thing, and I think that's what's exciting, is to have that in Paris is
Yeah.
super. Do you know what I mean? It's that really, because you kind of think of London as the place where people come from all over the world because they study here, and you don't perhaps identify that with Paris. And you're right, it's really rejuvenated that fashion week, which has always been quite diverse, because you obviously have the mega brands like your Vetements and what have you next to, you know, Rick Owens or someone like that. But I think you're right, on the young designer front it felt a little bit flat. Do you guys have a problem with the price point though? Because it's interesting, you've all talked about the fact that, you know, you can like that these, it's a relatively kind of accessible look, you can kind of mimic certain aspects, but like, you know, those jeans that you mentioned, the Levi's cut up and fashioned into the Vetements jeans, they're like £880 or something. What do you guys think of that price point?
I feel quite ambivalent, and I think it's kind of problematic having, I mean, a cotton track pant selling for $600, and they kind of promote themselves as being very inclusive and democratic, and I think these notions sell, but I don't think it actually is the case in the clothing, and I feel they target also a very kind of specific audience, like young creative. And we were talking about that earlier, the models, they're all kind of white models, and they relate to a certain specific kind of sort of art student ideal. And so I feel, there's a certain degree of ambivalence there on their part as well.
So do you think it's about sort of, there is an element where they're sort of commodifying this particular aesthetic and selling it back to people?
Yeah, I think then they play on this idea of being sort of authentic, and it is to a certain, I can see why, but I feel it's also a very effective marketing tool.
I think in terms of like the show, it's directed towards art students and like young people. But when it comes to retail, art students can't really afford it.
And like he goes on about this, like, I'm just making real clothes, and like these are like clothes that I see around, and these are clothes for real people, but real people can't afford that. Like there's a very small minority group of people who can afford a 400-pound hoodie. And I understand, because he says that it's a business, but there are other brands that can still find a balance between making clothes for real people and still having like a business growth.
Well, it's interesting to relate it to Gosha, because Gosha's price point is obviously significantly lower, and it's a similar kind of real, quote unquote, aesthetic, and it appeals to kind of, it's casual, you know, it's that notion of you spend a lot of money on something, or you spend a significant amount of money on something so you can wear it every day, rather than buying like a party dress or what have you. But then I think there's always that difficulty, isn't there? Because, you know, what justifies something being expensive? I think, you know, because we tend to have this idea in our head that if something is expensive, it should be sort of rare, it should be something that you can't wear a lot, or that isn't kind of practical. Whereas in a way, if you think, do you guys ever do that thing where you're buying something, you're like pound per wear, and you kind of work out whether it's worth it based on how many times I think I kind of get the price of this, because you actually think if you're going to wear it every day, then why shouldn't it be, you know, why do we think it's normal to spend £1,000 on a dress, which is what most high fashion dresses cost roughly, where you probably wear it 3 times, when spending £900 on a pair of jeans that you might wear every day for 2 years. Do you see what I mean? It's this weird idea that we have in our head about worth and cost.
I don't know if that's true, because there are certain brands that do that, like the Row. They really have this where if you're gonna invest in one piece, make it the best one. But then Vetements is much more trendy, and I think everybody knows their pieces of every show up until now, and I think even the first collection pieces, if you wear them now, they can already seem outdated and feel like, oh, that's the last season piece. This fashion snobbery and exclusivity is definitely attached to their label. So I don't know if their pieces for me wouldn't be an investment.
Do you think there's been too much hype around it?
There's just been like, because most of his most expensive pieces are the ones that have the logos or like the graphics, and they're the ones that you see most photographed. So then that's kind of what you relate to the brand. So in a sense, there becomes too much hype around it. Like that Vetements hoodie, like you saw Kanye wearing it, and like you see other celebrities wearing it. And so to my friends who are not interested in fashion, like back home, they'll be like, oh, like what's that hoodie with like the biker hoodie Kanye was wearing? Like what's that brand? Like do they just make hoodies? Because they thought it was like trash, and they were like, oh, is it like £100? Can you get it for me? And I was like, no, it's not.
But tell me, it's interesting that because, you know, they kind of come out and talked about that, about being overhyped and then becoming a part of the kind of movement, and it doesn't seem underground or cool anymore. And is that in danger of happening?
I think initially what was also interesting about them is the way they operate. Also more than the clothes, perhaps.
Definitely.
And that has kind of maybe gotten lost by the fact that there's been so much focus on the head designer, and that now he's going to Balenciaga, so he's been kind of completely absorbed by the system. I mean, and in a way I find that maybe it would have been better for the industry as a whole to have Vetements as another model than kind of integrating it and becoming kind of a standard.
And what do we think about that model? It's actually interesting to get your perspective on this, as like, you know, from a design perspective. What do you think of this notion as operating as a collective or a collaborative set of people? Because that is actually relatively rare in fashion that you see that happening.
Yeah, it's really rare. Or, I mean, it's always like one person that's like the face of the brand, but actually almost every brand is a huge team behind. And I really like the idea like that it's the team is the brand, that is not like they don't put a face on it, like Margiela, for example. Like now that's changed as well after Galliano. Alright, but I because I think the first season, like it was some, like we didn't really know who was the face of Vetements, and that made it kind of exciting that it was this like, whole team behind. But now I feel it's really kind of entering the system now, and I think that's a shame, because it's like we need like new brands, and I really believe in like teamwork that way, because that's how it works. So why won't we like put it like actually
keep it
that way. Like
it's interesting that a lot of you are using the word the system, and I'm sure you've all read, because there's been a lot of commentary this season about like the system being broken, and people talking about, and you know, and Vetements are interesting because of that, because they've also come out and talked about how they're kind of going to remodel in terms of their sort of commercial way of operating, which has obviously been a big thing this season with Burberry and Tom Ford and Paul Smith and lots of people kind of realigning. They've said that, you know, Demna even came out and said the whole system doesn't work anymore. The whole vicious circle turns and turns at a very fast speed and kills both the creativity and the business. He talks about people surviving on making bags and perfume, and they've come out and they've said that, you know, they're only going to produce 2 collections a year. They've said that they're going to do that from the start. They're not going to engage in making pre-collections, but it means they're going to flip how they show slightly and then show a bit later when the pre is coming out, but do these 2 collections. They're going to bring in menswear. What do you guys think of all this comment that the system is broken? Do you guys agree? What's everyone sort of talking about at a student level? Because it's interesting that you guys you're kind of graduating to go work in the system that everyone is saying is failing. What does everyone think about it?
I feel the system is there. It's like, I don't think it's going to be broken somehow, but it's just that like fashion constantly change, and that, you know, now it's this new breed with like kind of like it's interrupting the established more, kind of like it's more like disturbing the system kind of with this new energy and kind of new approach to design. But I think the system will always be there because it's like so well established, but it can always, you know, come like fresh air into it.
Do you guys feel that though? Do you feel like you have the opportunity to kind of not just conform to the way it existingly operates, or do you not really feel that there's, because it does feel like, as you say, it's quite entrenched and pervasive, these ways of doing things. You know, if you're a designer, you jump on the Fashion Week bandwagon, you show at Fashion Week, you know, all of that. Do you guys feel like you have an option in any way to opt out? Are there people who are opting out who you're interested in? Because we've all kind of said that Vetements seem to opt out and then perhaps haven't. What's everyone's take?
I feel like...
Go ahead.
I feel like it's really clever on his part because it gives him more attention, or it gives Vetements more attention, which it's great because it's like, it's still establishing itself. But then, like you said, like Burberry is doing it, Tom Ford, like they're all kind of jumping on it, and I feel like the system isn't really going anywhere, but it's just turning into a different system. And then in like a couple decades or in a couple of years, depending how fast it moves, everyone might be doing what he's doing, and that'll be known as the system in 10 years. So I don't know if it's necessarily opting out of the system. I think it's just kind of like altering it or curating it to fit himself best. Because like, if you think about it, if he's only going to show 2 collections, that means like he's going to get more time on like, to talk like retail, he's going to get more time on the floor. People are going to see his clothes or like that specific collection for a lot longer. And then like, I guess like become more familiar with his brand versus like if he did 4 collections, then like that image or that type would constantly change and people wouldn't really understand. But yeah, it's clever.
So you think it's just tweaking things like that?
Yeah.
But do you guys buy into the concept of Fashion Week? Do you think that it's something that is relevant and interesting and should continue, or do you think that it's all become a bit of this kind of circus?
Yeah, I feel it's a circus for the bloggers, really, and kind of, really, it's kind of more of a show off for everyone else, and it's creating kind of this superficial image of the fashion industry that I really don't think is right, because like it's like behind the scene where all the designers are working, like it's so much more down to earth than actually what shows during Fashion Week, I feel. So it's just this like,
And you don't actually focus that much on the work, do you? Because you get caught up in everything
in all, it's like a circus pretty much.
Yeah.
And after one week finishes, another starts. Like, you could show menswear, like, Fashion Week's been on since like January.
It's like
it's always Fashion Week. It's like genuinely always Fashion Week.
And there's like pre-fall and it's like, there's so much production.
Yeah. Do you think it's quite an unethical system? Does it? Because it does feel like more constantly, and that is, you know, it's overwhelming for people who are in the system. But I wonder if you guys going into it, do you feel like, God, this is just like, what's your take on it?
I think having rough assignments step down, is kind
important.
of very important, and has probably will probably help bring change to a certain degree. There's certainly a problem with pace, and also the way clothing are made to be available straight away. I mean, do we want that or not? Not sure. Yeah.
What do you guys think about that? Because I think there's very good arguments to be made either way. In some ways I do agree clothing being made straight away, it kind of finally brings us back to a point where it feels like Fashion Week is actually operating with a shopper in mind or a consumer in mind, which is important. I think, you know, for a long time, fashion criticism, fashion shows, they've seemed completely removed from the person who actually buys the clothing. So in some ways I think it's great, but then I understand the argument saying that this is just going to exacerbate the pace. What do you guys think about this whole see now, buy straight away, what have you?
I think it's really interesting because on the talk yesterday on Paco Rabanne, one of the speakers said that it was such a shame that the foreplay was taken away from the consumer, that this idea of seeing a collection online, seeing the show, and then having to wait these 6 months, you know, the tension that it's created, the longing for an object which is so inherent to fashion itself. But that foreplay has only existed since we've put shows online. And so the consumer has only had this 6 months of waiting time since the internet is there. So before, you would go to the shop, see the collection for the first time, and I believe many clients would buy immediately. and would be there as soon as the new collection
Yeah.
arrives and choose their wardrobe for the next season. And so I think we're actually just going back to that.
You're completely right. I think people are acting like this is this kind of system that's been born out of the digital age, whereas actually the digital age has kind of made this system that existed for a short amount of time, which was the collections were seen so much far before they were they could be bought. So yeah, that I think that's a really good point. Do you think it will take away kind of anticipation, like when you're shopping, when you're looking at things? Do you guys like that waiting? Do you guys save up for high fashion? Is it something that you engage with, or does it feel totally removed from your reality?
I think it's kind of sad because like after the shows they usually do like editorials or the campaigns come out, and then the magazines and photographers get the pieces. And like personally, I mean, I couldn't afford high fashion like certain pieces that I would want, but you see these editorials and you see these campaigns, and that's kind of when a lot of my friends make decisions or get inspired. Like, I didn't know you could wear that hoodie that way, and like the person who shot it, like that looks beautiful, it didn't look that good on the catwalk. And because like everything's available, I think it makes people just like buy the pieces that have been hyped around during the show and not during the season, that like have kind of cultivated and then maybe become cult pieces. And like it also makes you question, like, will there be any more cult pieces, or like is it just like a free-for-all?
Yeah, it takes the power away from the press.
Yeah, and it's a little desperate. Like, do you really need to see like everyone wearing your clothes right after the show? Like, you're making money, and like it's kind of like a student thing, but like I don't know, I just think it's kind of desperate that like you are that insecure with your brand or like your like imaging that you need people to buy your stuff right away, and you want people to be like incredibly interested right from the get-go.
So you think it's going to take a lot of the creativity out of it because we're not going to see these amazing shoots, and we're not going to see...
Yeah, because like catwalk images are boring anyways as they are, and like, no one shoots from the side like they used to, or like around the catwalk. It's just all the way to the end. And then now you're making it even more demanding, like these are the only images that you can use when you're buying it, because you have to buy it right away or it might get sold out. And you can't wait till the editorials or the magazines and campaigns come out.
Relating to that, it's interesting that Vetements uses kind of a lot of styling, so there is kind of the editorial look already
completely
made, so a whole package.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's talking about what you were saying about the kind of that typical flat, boring catwalk shot. I think a lot of younger labels are refusing to engage with that. So Vetements, as you say, it's heavily styled, but also the casting they use, it looks unusual. It doesn't look like a normal catwalk image, and that is the same for a lot of people in London. You see that with someone like Charles Jeffrey or Claire Barrow or Molly Goddard, or a lot of these people sort of refuse to engage with that. Do you think that's important? Like when you guys look at Fashion Week and you look at kind of the models, whether it's like the way they look, their age, their ethnicities, do you think that there is a problem in terms of the kind of bodies that fashion is being shown on? You're nodding.
We were talking about this earlier about like how Vetements don't really get much stick about their casting.
Yeah. It's all white, is that?
Yeah, I think they should get more, just because it's supposed to be this cool crowd, like mostly Parisians, like some Russians and stuff, and it's all white people. Yeah. So I think when you're hiring models from agencies and stuff, it's different. I don't know how to explain it. It's like, I think it's more serious that they're not casting diverse models because they're street casting.
Why don't you think they get comments about it? Why don't you think people say anything? Do you think fashion is just used to being silent about issues?
I think because it's like cool and like young, and people just stick to like bigger brands and stuff. Yeah. Because I guess that's like a bigger picture of casting and like model agencies. Yeah. Whereas like this is like street casting. Yeah. So I think it should be a lot easier for them to cast diverse models.
Yeah. I think their defense, I imagine, and the reason people perhaps don't say anything is this notion of it being a collective. It's a group of friends. They can be like, well, this is just our reality. You know, when it's your reality, it's easier to almost be like, oh, we're not saying this is what we think it should be like. We're just saying this is our. But I completely agree with you. Like, I had a massive problem with some of the first collections by Alessandro Michele at Gucci, because it was, I think it was the first women's one. I don't want to get it wrong, and it was just all white. And I thought, you know, everyone's saying that this is new and fresh and relevant, and I was like, I don't understand how that can happen. Why is there such a problem with it in fashion? Do you think that it's not spoken about enough? It feels like it's one of the last sort of big taboos. Like, people don't call it out in show criticism.
I think people speak about it a lot, and now it's just become one of those things that, like, people say a lot and people just roll their eyes at it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of become one of those things like, is there any point saying it anymore?
Yeah.
Like, people will just like make this comment and they'll look past it and they'll be like, oh yeah, the show was really cool. Casting is so important nowadays. And I think it should just get better.
Why doesn't it get better?
I'm not sure.
I find it frustrating because you must see this being at college. Is like, I see it with student work sometimes where people will make, you know, they'll be doing a sample editorial or they'll be making a magazine, and they just, it's almost like completely unconsciously just like opt in to these ideas of beauty. It's all slim people, it's predominantly white, it's all young, and I don't do you guys see that happening at college a lot? What's your take on it all?
Well, not at college, but just thinking back at Gucci, I felt it was like the same male models as Eddie Slimane was using, very, very slim, and even the films and advertisement, I feel it's just, it's kind of a sort of fantasy, really, and it's problematic because it's so far away from reality in a way, and Vetements, you have this impression that they're closer, but there are, as you said, there's still that massive problem of not having a diverse cast.
Yeah. What I find so strange about it as well is, like, I kind of understand that some clothes, you know, it's laziness on the part of designers, but if you put it on a very slim body, it kind of makes the design hang right. Or, you know, if you've got some, like, the Gucci aesthetic works very well on an incredibly lithe body, but some of the pieces that Vetements make, like, actually would look great on a slightly diverse body, like not even a diverse body shape, just like a non-completely tiny body shape. So it does feel like missing a trick in a way. Like, I think Claire Barry's been really successful at that, about doing campaigns and presentations with different body shapes, because it shows you how kind of interesting her designs are, because they look really great on all the different women that she puts them on.
And, like, it would help with their, like, if there's such a business brand, it would help with their, like, selling of their clothes, because when I speak to my sister, because she's really obsessed with Vetements, but when we talk about it, and she'll send me, or I'll send her things, like, I sent her a couple pictures from the show, and she was just like, but I don't look like that, like, she's like, it wouldn't hang right, and she sent me, like, Kendall and a couple of other people wearing it. She's like, it looks so nice, like, it looks like what it looks like on the catwalk, and she's like, I'm not that tall and thin. And it's kind of sad because, like, when I was in Paris last, I saw this, like compared to, like, the fashion system, she was, like, larger and she was shorter and she was wearing the Vetements bomber jacket, and it looked so much cooler and so much different than it ever did on their shows. And it's kind of sad because, like, they push this whole, we're opting out of the system, and, like, we're not going to do what everyone else does, but they're doing exactly that. Like, obviously their casting's a little different, but it's kind of sad that there's no, like, color on that catwalk.
It looks like they went to a model agency, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't look like it's street casting. Like, if you don't know, if you haven't read up about the brand, you would think they went to a model agency.
And, like, this whole thing about, like, we're a collective, any designer can say that by being like, well, they do say that by saying it's our world, like, this is, like, my type of woman who lives in this type of city, and, like, these are her group of friends. Then, like, they're just doing that, what every other designer says, but instead of saying, like, this is our world, they're saying this is, like, our collective, or this is our group of friends.
And there is something, I find it strange that people would kind of be like, oh, you know, it's fine because it's just their reality, because then it's like, who wants to admit that their reality is only spending time with white people? It just does feel a little bit strange. I'm interested, what do we think of the appointment of Demna at Balenciaga? Are you guys excited about that? Do you think it's a good fit? What did you think of Wang at Balenciaga? That wonderful pairing.
It's probably I don't know. It was probably not the best fit, but I think it's very interesting they chose him now though, and I'm excited to see. But it's kind of like you see kind of a pattern, like they choose these like young up and coming kind of designers.
Yeah.
But it's really like an old kind of French like fashion house, so it's like I don't know if they try to like approach a new market or like why they do it that way, but it's very interesting though. It can like something amazing can come out of it. It's going to be really interesting to see. It's kind of like hard to tell, but yeah.
It's hard because I think Nicolas Ghesquière just made Balenciaga this thing in everyone's mind. So there's like the two spectres of Balenciaga. One is this kind of, you know, the like ultimate couturier, and then one is like Nicolas Ghesquière, like king of kind of, you know, contemporary design. And then it's like, how do you bring those together, and how do you slot someone new in? It's an interesting one. One thing that people have said a lot about Vetements is they've made comparisons to early Margiela shows, and, you know, obviously Demna and others from the collective were in the design team at Margiela, and then also Demna was at Louis Vuitton. Do you think part of the appeal of this to a younger generation is because it's that generation that kind of didn't see it the first time round, so they weren't aware of those early Margiela shows, or they can't see them online, or, you know, they can't access them? Do you think it is as fresh as people think? Or do you guys note the repetition?
It's really a repetition when I think about it. Like it's like Margiela did street casting, and it's like it's kind of all the same. And I mean, a big part of the Vetements team I've worked at Margiela, so it's like you can really see the repetition if you just do a bit of digging. And okay, I kind of lost.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
No,
to have a repetition,
no.
And I feel as they came up right around the same time that John Galliano.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Exactly.
Yeah. So for a lot of people, it feels like, okay, Margiela has changed into something new, but we can find a piece of the old Margiela with Vetements. Yeah. And they use a lot of his techniques or theories even to build their collection, but they're doing it with a language that is now, that is from our generation. I have the feeling.
But I think like people don't, like when people talk about it, they make it sound as if like he worked when the original like Maison was there, and it's kind of important to say like he didn't work with him, he worked with his team like much later on after he left. And so I think there was still that like idolization, and that's what he brings into his brand now. And I'm sure it was when he worked at Margiela as like the original Maison. And like, yeah, I just think it's important to say that he wasn't working in the 90s with like Margiela.
Also, every designer cites Margiela. Like, did you guys see at the Raf Simons show how he put a list? He doesn't usually do a press release, and he gave a list of all his inspirations, and on it he put Martin Margiela. And I kind of feel like, I agree it's kind of slippery and tricky because people say, well, they worked at Margiela, but then I think it's normal to kind of like mine the Margiela archive for inspiration. You know, every designer does that, and it is interesting to see that spirit kind of reinterpreted. And it is much less about, I think the way they reappropriate is subtly different. It's less about elevating sort of strange or unexpected objects. It's elevating commonplace things or graphics more than like, it's not like, you know, a sock jumper, it's like a DHL t-shirt. I think, and there is a subtle difference between that, and I think the flatness of that, you know, the focus on graphics and existing items is very now because it's very digital, and it's like, you know, it's like the reappropriation of imagery, which is something that you see across Tumblr and Instagram. It's very kind of in the blood of our generation, I think, and they do that very well. You know, it's almost like funny fake things, and I think we all speak that language. So it's interesting because of that. Should we look at the show, or does anyone have anything to add before we look? So Lotte walked in the show. She opened the show. It's in a church. Obviously, they've done shows in. They did a Chinese restaurant last season. They've done a nightclub. So this time it's in a church. Can we just stay on the first look for a second? What do you think of? Do we like? I kind of took it a little bit like she's a little bit of a bride, which is nice. And also, you think the bride usually closed the show, and obviously she opened it. What do you think of Lotte herself being in it? Because obviously that's quite a strange thing to have the stylist walk in it. Is it quite cool? Did you guys realise it was Lotte when you saw it? What do we think of it as a first statement?
I think it just continues on what Vetements does really well, which is this idea of the in crowd and and shutting other people out, whether they do it by price or their logo. You know, anybody thinks you're just wearing a DHL t-shirt, but only he knows it's a Vetements DHL t-shirt. And so again, using her is kind of like, who knows who she is.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing or positive thing.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it just extends on like the whole collective thing as well. It's about like the brand, and it's about like the collective. I think I read in an interview earlier about the casting, and she was like, "Oh yeah, we only cast like cool people," and like because like I think they asked her about her walking the show. She's like, "Yeah, we only cast cool people." It was quite funny.
Yeah, I'm kind of into that. I think she's really nice. Like, I really like her. I think she's lovely. I do have a problem with the casting being all white, as we talked about. I think it's really, really not good. But what do we think of aesthetically? What do we think of the show? It's very much what I was expecting. Yeah. Would you guys agree?
Yeah.
I think the show was a lot more like uniform this time. Yeah. Not in terms of like the clothing, but there was more like coherency. Whereas like the last seasons, you could see that different people had made different garments, and it was kind of more of like a group of friends. Whereas like this is like a show which has one
like theme. A cohesive idea. Yeah, I see what you mean. There was more and of a sense.
Maybe it might have something to do with Demna moving to Balenciaga and learning like that system, I guess.
I guess just you're right, operating more formally. There's a lot of critics picked up on like a real mood of like pessimism in the show. You know, that there's things like those two slogans there. So it's like, "Are we having fun yet?" and "You fucking asshole," which I quite like. What did you guys interpret? A kind of and there's a lot of people made comments about the fact that, you know, they were making these collections. I think it was Sarah Maurer in her review talked about how, you know, he would have been working on this collection, his first Balenciaga collection, sort of in the wake of the Paris attacks, and it's a difficult time. And have you guys felt that a bit this fashion week, that it's strange to look at all these clothes when the world is in such a kind of weird position? Is that something that you feel working in fashion? Because obviously fashion is such a reflection of the society that made it, and it's not exactly like the best time for society. Do you guys think about that? Are you encouraged to think about that at college?
I think it puts it into perspective sometimes, because like at college you'll be freaking out about a project or a crit, and like you just have to stop yourself and think like it's just clothes, and like it's just a photo, and there are bigger things going on. And like obviously like it's something we feel passionate for, but you have a whole life outside of fashion and outside of things. And like with like the pessimism, like I was reading this, like I think it was a really old interview, but he was saying that he doesn't like to create things when he's in a good mood. Like he loves being like really depressed and really angry when he's making things, which is kind of interesting, but it's very like that struggling artist.
I think that's really common actually, like the depressive kind of a thought like behind to get inspiration, like that mood. He said he was in a really dark place creating this collection with like the Paris attacks and everything. So I think like society will always like reflect the clothes on the catwalk.
It's awkward when fashion tries to comment on issues sometimes, though. That doesn't go down too well.
That's true.
Fashion is a mirror of society, but not I always feel that it cannot necessarily change society through clothing, or not any political situation. That would be naive to think.
Does fashion need to be more political though?
No.
No?
Oh,
authentically so.
Yeah.
Not like making a statement like the attack that happened in Paris. You shouldn't just do a collection on that because it happened, but because you felt moved by it, or you were affected or inspired in the right way. Like, a lot of people thought his like security clothes were about like the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and he was like, no, I just wanted to make a strong woman. Like, I think people who work in uniforms are really strong, and to put that on a woman, like, I want to make her strong. It wasn't about the attacks. And I feel like that's like this like ignorance that we have because we don't research enough, or like we don't think into things enough, that it's like, oh, like there's attacks happening, someone's making security it's obviously about the attack.
Yeah, that's superficial analysis. But, or for example, Walter van Beirendonck, in his 2 previous collections he did Stop Terrorizing the World, or the Flemish word for angry, he put on his t-shirt. So that is a way, I don't think it is political, but it's a way, as you said, to show how you feel in society today, and to express your emotions, which is something a designer always does or should do.
It's interesting that he's tried to convey that mood by kind of working on the body and not so much, and there's that feeling that the body is kind of contrived and deformed, and that's like a new move for them also to work towards that. So that's an interesting and maybe subtle way of dealing with that.
Yeah, I think the silhouette is very interesting. If we can just go back to that, to number 19 is particularly interesting in terms of the, if you think, like, it looks skinnier in that photo than it actually does when you see it on Instagram and stuff, because the bulkiness of some of the shoulders and the awkwardness of the fit, it is very different to the kind of, to the Eddie Slimane kind of youth, lithe body, cool young person thing, where it's all about super skinny, super shrunken, whereas this is definitely like, there's an element of it being very awkward and kind of quite boxy shapes, and it's I find that interesting. I find the silhouette they push really different compared to a lot of because it is so much about fetishizing youth, and it fetishizes the kind of nonchalant way that young people can get dressed, but it doesn't fetishize a slim form in quite the same way. I don't think it's slightly different, and I do think that's interesting.
I love what you said, Sahil, before about the hoodie.
Yeah, it's like, I was saying, we were talking about it before, but I was saying that I wish I'd seen this when I was like growing up as a teenager, because like there's this look where one of the models has like a hoodie and her arms look, and like her shoulders are up, and like that's how I used to sit when I was getting yelled by my parents. And then you just put the hoodie on, and you'd be like, leave me alone. And like some of these things where it's like, growing up, if I'd seen it, you kind of, well, personally, I would have been okay with my posture, but I remember my dad would always be like, sit up straight, like shoulders back, and these shoulders are like so far back, and it's just really nice.
Leave me alone, Dad.
But I have this theory, like, we did a video on SHOWstudio for our sportswear series, which was about the hoodie, and it's Gary Warnock kind of gives a history of the hoodie, and it is, in my opinion, like the last kind of really political garment. If you think about it, like black leather jacket, if you saw someone wearing it in the street, you used to be afraid of that. Now it's like so ubiquitous, it's so normal, like every young woman has like a Topshop, Zara black leather jacket, whereas a hoodie, like, it's still, if you see someone in the street with their hood up and you're like, it's late at night, and you can like present certain feeling. Like, I've been scared of people in hoodies, but then I also myself have worn a hood and put it up for that same kind of security and that feeling, and I think it's a very political garment, and I think it's interesting that they play with it in the way they do. What do you think of that slogan that they did? It's May the bridges I burn light the way. What do you think of that? I find the way they do wording interesting. It makes me think a little bit of Raf Simons and the kind of, you know, those who spit and the fear generation, blah 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 blah. What do you guys think of the use of wording and sloganing? That feels very now, like very very current. Do you like it, or do you think it's
a kind of way of kind of putting their avant-garde status out there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, and as you said with Gosha walking in the show, it's very much them asserting, oh, we're this new thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know quite how I feel about it, but there's this definite desire to push that avant-garde thing forward.
It's a clever way of branding as well, which is something you talked about, isn't it? Because it means like it doesn't have the Vetements logo on it, but everyone knows it's Vetements. It's like almost like doing a logo, and I think it speaks to a generation who like people to know where their clothes are from, but the right people to know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's where they're very different from Margiela, actually. Margiela, who was in complete anonymity, who never put, while he was there was never a logo except for the 4 stitches.
Yeah,
on
which
the
is
back.
probably the cleverest form of branding, because actually it's
Yeah.
really obvious when someone's wearing Margiela, but then it's like, oh, it's unbranded. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it's clever.
But here the logo is everywhere.
Yeah.
And those are also as you said, the pieces you see the most, and it's very Instagrammable. Everything they do.
Yeah, Instagrammable moments. So do we, and also the Justin t-shirt.
That was
we
my
all
favorite.
fans.
But it's like people love to I think people like to contextualize text or logos a lot, especially with him in this collection, because there's so much font, but maybe he was just listening to a song. And like that white t-shirt that I can't remember what it said, like one of the first looks, that's like that's a song lyric from like Belgian Waffles, that song. And I'm sure he was listening to it because like they go to, like, he talks about how much he loves like new wave and like old Belgian songs. So I'm sure they were probably listening to it in the studio and they're like, why not just put it on a t-shirt?
Yeah, but it's that thing of but that's so our generation. It's that I keep saying our generation, like I'm like 18. Cool. But like it's like that thing of kind of regramming something silly, like you know, writing something funny, tweeting something, like it's that kind of quip mentality, which I think really, you know, it's that kind of nonchalant, like I'm kind of ambivalent, unengaged, but I can say something funny. It's like very droll. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of, which I think, you know, no, it's not cool to be like engaged. Like it really buys into that thing of like, it's cool to be apathetic. It's cool to not care. It's cool to be a little bit like, even like willfully, maybe like.
But that has always been cool.
Yeah, exactly.
The cool guys never care.
Yeah,
but I think a new way to
that's
do it.
what kind of I find, that's the only element of it that I don't like, is it I don't think it promotes this notion of being like active, or you know, it's very passive, it's very kind of throw it on, like you know, pop culture, like the Justin thing, it's very like whatever, like you know, that kind of thing. And I think it's important to encourage young people to be sort of actively political, not apathetically political. So like not to opt out, but to like be engaged and enraged and like you know, feel the sense of urgency, whereas this is very much like, oh, just sit around being cool. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like that's something that I worry about with it a little bit. But
and there's the feeling that they've like thrown into these kind of cool pieces, but you have other elements that can really easily sell, and that kind of very simple in a way.
Yeah.
So it feels a little superficial at times.
What would we like to see happen next for Vetements? Do you think they need to, we talked about their casting that needs to be reconsidered, but do you see this now as a brand that's entered the system? Or is it still something that you're kind of excited by, that's challenging things? Or who are the people that you really think are challenging things, who you are? Because it seems like you all kind of think that they were at the start and perhaps less so now. Are there people who you're impressed by or inspired by who are sort of opting out or changing the way that you think about things?
I knew you were gonna ask that question, and so I was thinking about it for a long time. And actually, one of the last shows I got really excited about was Rick Owens, when he did the acrobatic, it was almost performance art rather than a fashion show. And I thought that was very emotional and very strong. But then the way it was perceived by the industry, it didn't reflect that at all, and most people just thought like, oh, why is he doing this? Just an easy way to get attention. They didn't get it. And I think that's because most people saw it through Instagram immediately. You know, most journalists, they were immediately snapping at it, putting captions like, why is he doing this? It doesn't make any sense. Of course it doesn't make any sense if you don't have time to think about it. And so then I think, is a designer still relevant if his collection is not understood because he doesn't work through the medium that everybody understands fashion by? Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense.
So this fashion show was so emotional and so strong, but if his audience doesn't get it because they only see it through Instagram, then maybe it was a failure in a way.
So that kind of goes back to what we're saying about the fashion fashion week and the fashion show system not suiting kind of people doing things that are genuinely innovative. Do we all agree with that to an extent?
But then again, it's quite nice to have them all in one place that you can easily compare, instead of like brands choosing to show in different places, so they don't have that kind of confrontation with other brands. So I kind of like the fact that it's condensed in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you guys feel optimistic for your futures within fashion, or is it what's the kind of mood at college? Because it's a difficult time to be young and difficult time to kind of, the whole industry's in a bit of a mess, but it's also, it's a difficult time in any industry to sort of get a job, pursue a career. How are you guys feeling about it all? Does something like this kind of galvanise you, or is it just more of the same?
It was like a really annoying question. I think it's definitely weird to start your career or end your studies in a time where everybody's just talking about how the system doesn't work and everything is broken and everything sucks. And so, we're supposed to be very excited about what's happening, but we don't feel that reflected, I feel.
Yeah, and it makes me angry sometimes because we don't have time to just kind of stop after university or after college, or even on a day-to-day basis. It's always like I need to think 5 steps ahead if I want to have a job where I can do stuff like this and just kind of do it on my own. Then I need to think 5 years before I need to have a commercial job that makes me money, that gives me the freedom to do this. And it's this constant like future, and you kind of just want to stop sometimes and think about today or like the next few hours, but you are always told, or you kind of get it drilled in you, not from school but from everywhere else, that you need to plan ahead. And it makes the future seem daunting, and it makes it not exciting because from 5 years ahead you'll be thinking 10 years ahead, like, and keep that going. And it's just really sad. And I know it's not positive, but like it is really sad sometimes. And like I love seeing stuff like this, but then I think you initially think, how am I gonna get there? Like he must be really lucky because it worked out for him, but what are the chances? And like it's just a really daunting thought.
Do you guys agree with that? There was a lot of kind of melancholy nods.
Yeah, it is. It's like you consider, can I even work in fashion after this degree? That's where I'm at now. I'm like, because it's like really hard to enter, and it's like it's so many jobs and things you can do, but at the same time it's just like entering the system. How are you going to do that? It's a challenge, and it kind of kills the spirit again.
Yeah.
And the creativity as well.
And it feels like you have to opt into a lot of things. There's not much like freedom or personal choice to do things differently. It's like you have to do things a certain way.
Yeah, and just to make a living.
Do you feel that as well? Because you often use this term to opt in and to kind of leave behind your ideals, student ideals.
I think it's like a busy system, it's a busy industry. So I think if you work in fashion, you have to work incredibly hard. So I think there's a thing of like, you're always to an extent opting in to kind of a certain degree of mania. And it's very hard to have like a balanced life if you live in fashion, which is maybe fair enough because there's always someone who will do your job and work just as hard and probably do it for less money. So I think it makes it hard to have the time to think about things. I think that's a problem. It's like often you're kind of just trying to work hard and get enough work done that, and you're traveling or you're busy and you're doing stuff that I think it does make it hard to be conscious and have enough time to sit and go, what do I actually think about this, or am I comfortable doing this? Sometimes I think that's a problem. I do think there are elements of like knowing things that you wouldn't be comfortable writing about, and I think you have to think about those quite early on, or you wouldn't be comfortable doing like, the things that I think about as a journalist. Like I don't really like writing pieces that tell people they should look a certain way or they should buy a certain thing. I don't think I'd be good at that. There's some journalists that can do that. So I think it's important to think about those kind of things. I think it's easier as a writer in some way. I think if you're a designer, it's very, very hard to kind of, the whole industry is built on like a certain body shape being the norm, and all of this. And I think it's very hard to make decisions. And I think also your generation, the cost of your education means that like no one wants to fail or try anything or buck the system. It's like everyone just wants to kind of, it's made education quite transactional, where it's like, you need your good grade, but you also feel like you've paid for your good grade. So it means no one's going to go and be like, I interview a lot of like super interesting people who are a bit older, and they'll talk about like messing up a year or like, failing. And I feel like people, and often that turns out to have been really like formative and important for them, but I feel like
we don't have that privilege.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's not like, lol, I completely failed and moved to Paris with my boyfriend and like joined a collective, but then I came back and completed my studies. It's like you have to be like, it's like, well, that's like £9,000 gone. Do you know what I mean? Like do you guys feel that kind of that pressure?
I mean, to start something now, it feels like you need a business plan. Like in the 90s, maybe it was like, oh, let's just put up a magazine. It feels more constraints, but at the same time there's also some interesting stuff happening in magazines and digital media. So possibilities opening and closing it, I guess too. So it's not all bleak, I guess.
I think it's like a big part of it is in our heads as well, because you have this like social media where you can look into like everyone else's life all the time, and it creates this kind of like image of like how you're supposed to live your life, and I think that's why people maybe like stop being spontaneous and just move to Paris with your boyfriend and join a collective, whatever, because it's like you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to have this like perfect life, blah blah blah, but in the end it's just on your phone, right? It's like it's not really reality.
Are you all on social media? Do you all use it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, it's interesting though, because a lot of are there people at college who opt out, who don't do that? Because I'm interested by some young people who seem super apathetic towards the internet, like they don't like it, they don't engage with it, or do you feel like there's a huge presence to be on platforms?
I think a lot of people get a lot of like work from their social media. If you do like communications, having an Instagram with your work on it is basically like a resume. So I think it's really important for like if you're doing like visual stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but like there's this thing a couple months ago with one of my friends from my class, and we get like really anxious on social media because you, as like an image maker, you see like Instagram's like the holy grail where you just see so many images, but it's really overwhelming, and there's this like sense of pressure to have an image that gets this many likes means like you're a really good photographer. And we just like closed our Instagram accounts for like 3 months, and we were just like, we're not gonna do this. Like we like, and I remember like she just felt so much better about everything, and her ideas became much more like authentic and not just one-dimensional. And it's like recently, like because now we're preparing for our year of placements, like we're constantly told, or I guess like because everyone's doing it, to put your work up on Instagram. And I hate it because it's like my Instagram isn't like, it's not to show my work, it's my one thing that I can just do for myself. And like we've kind of become like, my friend and myself, like we're just like, we don't care about likes, we don't care about all those things. These are just our pictures that we take on a day-to-day basis. I don't want to constantly be judged like your Instagram is shit, so you're not a good photographer. And yeah, I don't know, social media is a weird thing.
It's interesting because it feels like the notion of a career and a job is like, it felt like for a long time people went to college and then they got a job, whereas it feels like you all think in a very careerist way, and that's something that people kind of have to do. Is that something that's very much on your minds now? Because it's this idea that art school was where you went to like learn and experiment, but now it feels like it's like the step in and move to a career. Is that very much the sense? Is there a real sense of competition?
Most people will have an internship while they're studying. Which can be difficult because usually it's unpaid, and then they have to have like a night job, which is like a bar. I think experience is how you get forward in fashion. If you come out after 3 years in fashion, like studying, and you don't have experience, it's going to be really hard to get a job, and you're kind of going to have to do interning anyways. So people usually just do it during their studying time.
But it's interesting now that like you need fashion experience to work in fashion, whereas like before it used to be like I worked like I worked at a bar and then I met someone and then I got a job eventually, and now it's like, oh, you haven't worked in a fashion company, like why should I hire you?
Yeah. So do you think the industry's too corporate? It's becoming too there's not I guess, which is what seems exciting about this, is it seems like it kind of came out of nowhere, but you're right, you know, it didn't. They've all had jobs and worked and toiled and like, but do you think there's not enough of that spontaneity?
I think the industry knows that like students and anyone who wants to work in fashion, they're all disposable.
Yeah.
If you don't want to do that job, they can leave you and someone will come in the next day and do it, which I think is kind of annoying.
Yeah.
Because you don't have any self-worth in your I do mine, but like you don't have any self-worth.
Like, I love mine.
Yeah, you don't get any of that self-worth or like appreciation.
Yeah.
And like if you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna leave next week, then like, all right, fine, they'll put a post on Instagram being like, looking for a new intern.
So you don't feel very special?
In some jobs you do, but in some jobs it's just like the idea that like everyone wants that job, so they don't really need you. And if you don't like dropping bags off, or if you don't like making tea, that fashion experience that everyone has, someone else will do it.
Yeah, I feel there needs to be a bit more regulation surrounding internships, because it feels like it's one internship, unpaid internship after the other, and if you haven't got financial backing or if you're not working somewhere else, it's more and more difficult to get that job experience they asked for. And maybe the fashion industry kind of takes advantage of that system in a way. Not only the fashion industry, more generally as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like you pay to be able to work, you know?
Yeah.
It's like upside down, and it's like talk about all this like kind of sustainable fashion, blah blah, but I just feel like at its core fashion is so unsustainable when it comes to like how they treat their interns. Like it starts there even, you know, with like we graduate and then we're supposed to work a year for free doing an internship. Like I'm really glad I did my internship as part of my degree, but I mean it's unpaid, so it's actually so expensive to be a fashion student. And then
but do you not think an industry that doesn't even treat its creative directors well, how is it going to treat its interns well? Like if you think, you know, some of the most talented designers in the world, if you look at the positions they end up in, you know, McQueen is the obvious example, but Galliano, but also, you know, obviously much less traumatic and upsetting, but Raf Simons, like, you know, doing 3 years and probably the most high profile job in fashion and then saying, you know, I can't do this. I don't see how an industry that can't protect those people can be expected to protect anyone at any other level of the ladder.
Yeah.
Depressing times.
Yeah. The success of Vetements can also be seen as something positive, to see how excited the industry reacts to anybody doing something different. So you do feel we can see it as we're being on a tipping point. Changing point, and everybody's gasping for air, looking for something to change, and so we might be that generation to just say Justin forever.
That's a good note to end on, because that's kind of positive. Should we give them a round of applause for giving us stuff to talk about?